I thought we would get started. I've just thrown you
Great.
off completely with the you got this cards. Is that
I
all
love
right?
these. I absolutely love them. Yes, crack on.
Amazing. 100 inspiring quotes. So I'm going to give the cards a little shuffle, and then when you're ready, you can just tell me when to stop, and I'll stop. And I'll take
Hit me,
the top
baby.
card. Okay, here we go. Right. So
There's lots of noises going on. I'm
I
not
know,
entirely
well,
sure how
it's
positive they
fitting
are.
for the episode. So the card that's come up for you is the best and most beautiful things in the world cannot be seen or even touched. They can only be felt.
Oh, my Lord.
I kid you not. That is the card that's come up.
That is the universe delivering discussion point number 1.
Thoughts, Nadine?
Yeah, where do I start? Wow. There's a lot of talk about, in the moment in the psychotherapy community, about the difference between the, in inverted commas, male-led head kind of perspective on life and the female body-led perspective on life. And so we have been led as a culture here in the West by the head. And so we value logic, we value rationality. And if we apply that to sex, yeah, we're not having good sex. Basically, we need to certainly let go of our head, because the sex then leaves us kind of focused on I'm being judged, I'm monitoring myself. And so if we're monitoring ourselves, then we're in a goal-driven dimension. And so we are not embodied. We're not enjoying ourselves. I mean, that question, that comment, that statement that you just read is massive. That is a tiny fraction of kind of how I want to respond, really.
I know.
But we focus too much on the head, I think, is what I'm saying, as a culture.
And I think we just need to let our listeners know, because you've dropped it already. We are talking about sex today, everybody, and the intersection of creativity and sex, or intimacy. And we're going to explore lots of different aspects of this. But I wondered, for the listeners, Nadine, if you want to talk to us a little bit about who you are and what you do, just so that we have that context.
Sure. I hope I haven't put the cart before the horse there, Lucy.
You haven't. I love it.
I'm Nadine. Hello, everybody. I'm Nadine Pittam. I'm a psychotherapist, and I work in Manchester with individuals and couples, primarily with people who are struggling with relationships, specifically intimate relationships, but also family relationships, friendship bonds, that kind of thing too, but specifically relationships. And I have a psychosexual qualification. I'm not officially a psychosexual therapist. That requires years of training. I've not got the full years. I've done a shorter course than that, but I do glance across psychosexual work as well in my practice. I do a little bit online too, but predominantly face-to-face.
And what is psychosexual therapy?
It's amazing. As a therapist, if you put the word sex on your profile, people then feel like this is something I can talk about. So I'll have couples in my room who come and start talking about how their relationship is struggling, or how it's successful, all the areas that are difficult. And they will ask permission sometimes. Can we talk about sex? So it's this area that we are all supposed to know about. We're all supposed to know how to have sex, because, we've all seen a 3-minute clip on a movie once. So we're all supposed to know how it happens, but nobody actually kind of really ever really talks about it. I think I say ever. People don't often talk about it. And I think in couples as well, I don't know whether people listening can relate to this, that the language that we have for sex in couples is also limited, I think. We start having sex at an age where people are still giggling about sex. We can't even talk about it properly when we start having it. We can't even use the words to talk about it when we start having it. And then we're all supposed to just know what to do. It is a doing rather than a being, to refer back to your initial card quote.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think when we had our first sort of Insta chat, and I was gauging where we might go with this conversation, you mentioned Esther Perel, and I don't know if those people who are listening, I'm sure you've heard of her, but you wanted to draw upon this idea that she states as creativity and sex are so intertwined, actually, as being a place that we go. Is that right?
That's certainly what
So
Esther
what's your
Perel...
perspective? Yeah, what's your perspective on that then?
Well, Esther Perel's brilliant, isn't she? Because in order to be fully embodied, we have to come out of our heads to a certain extent, or to a large extent. And she compares it to entering sleep. We don't do sleep. It's not an activity. We're not monitoring ourselves. Although if we buy watches that monitor us, then are we kind of taking something that is essentially an embodied practice and making it a mental or cognitive one? Maybe. So it's probably best that we ditch those tools and engage with our own bodies, we can wake up in the morning and know, if we consult our body, we can tell what the quality of our sleep has been. And so we enter sleep in the same way that we enter a sexuality or an eroticism, if we talk about it as eroticism, perhaps rather than sex, because that's a broader concept, isn't it? And let me be really clear, I'm not talking about porn. I'm talking about eroticism as a sort of broader concept, which is kind of asexuality in its broadest sense. And so, yes, we enter a place, and anybody who's had conception sex, to get pregnant, that's kind of doing sex for a purpose with a goal at the end of it. And anybody who's had to do that for more than once will tell you that it's just the most horrific thing. And it can put a lot of pressure on the couple, on the relationship as well. So, there are kind of practical examples. I could say a little more about psychological surrender, but we can kind of we can come back to that. I'm sure it'll pop up again and again.
And no pun intended. So
there'll be a few of them, I'm sure. We could wheel in a pun every other sentence here.
I hope so. It's funny, isn't it? Because I just want to go back to the point you made about not knowing how to talk about sex. Because even before I pressed record, both of us expressed some level of anxiety around talking about this from both perspectives, from both sort of hilltops. And I was wondering, how get to a place where we can have conversations? I mean, how do we frame that when we're talking to our partner? Or, I have so many conversations with my girlfriends about sex and, all of the squeamish bits and all of the funny bits and, the most serious moments in those parts of our lives. But how do we get to a point where we can talk about it that feels fulfilling and nurturing and supportive and safe?
Mm-hmm. It's a massive question, that, isn't it? I'm not entirely sure I can answer it concisely. I think perhaps what we've got here is an individual fight, if we can just focus on our own individual attitudes to sex. And you're right, the way that we talk about sex often in our society here in the UK is often much like we talk about alcohol. It's a bit kind of, hey, whoa, and it's all gung-ho and there's really, nobody's talking truthfully. It's about achievements. It's about notches on the bedpost, successes, conquerings. And so it's rarely a kind of mature conversation about what sex is. And I think probably the best place for people to start when they're listening to this is to think about your own experience. Think about, and I don't mean your own sexual experience, I mean your own introduction to the question, the concept of sex, or like I say, eroticism. What happened in your family of origin? So how was sex talked about? And was it even silent? Because that's also being talked about by the absence of being talked about. So how did your family of origin handle it? Was it sex is something exclusively for one particular demographic? Was it related to success and failure? Was it related to disgust? Was it related to shame? And I think what we'll find is if we took a little sample of your audience, I imagine we'd get a lot of people probably somewhere along the line have learned something shameful. So you say, why do we find it difficult? Is because we're all supposed to know. It's all in the dark. We're all supposed to know what to do, but nobody actually really talks about it. And also, here's another massive thing, which I think is changing slightly now, which is how sex is taught in schools. So we're thinking about this being the kind of compulsory education, compulsory in inverted commas, the mandatory kind of education that we get. Because we can't rely, I imagine the political parties believe that we can't rely on parents to teach children properly, so we have to put it in schools as a safety net. And think back again to your own education, your own explicit education of sex. How much of that was about pleasure? The bulk of people have sex education that's about not catching an STI and not getting pregnant. Or maybe if you do get pregnant, this is what happens, and this is the biological, very clear, let's talk about embryos, blah, blah, blah. But actually, what it's not about is how to enjoy the time, how to, and whether it's a long-term partner or a one-night stand, how do we prioritize pleasure? And so if we can't have that conversation, then I don't see how. And I think that, let me start again. I think it's got to happen on a personal level.
Yeah.
If we ourselves can't talk about it, then of course nobody else, we can expect that other people would struggle too. And so it's a radical act to become familiar with it and comfortable and confident talking about it just on a personal level. And then I think that spreads. It'd be interesting to hear if you had a conversation with your friends and you approach those conversations a little differently, whether they would also follow suit, or would they go, shut up, Lucy, and start cackling on about, I don't know, maybe I'm judging the conversations you're having with your friends.
No, I'm going to throw it out to my friends and see what they say. Yeah, it's an interesting one, and I think it does require us to be vulnerable and to own our story as well, I think is what I'm hearing from that. And while you were talking there, I was also thinking about how I approach that topic, but also how that links with my creativity as well. Because if we're not being creative for pleasure, whether it be our pleasure or somebody else's pleasure, then it becomes something else. It becomes a chore, and it's something obligatory. And so that there's crossovers there, I think, that I'm hearing. I'm gonna flip to my script because I haven't done anything yet to do with my script and the questions that I sent to you. But, hey ho. So the first question, and I know you spent a little bit of time thinking about this, and I am going to put the questions that I have proposed to Nadine in the show notes as well, with some other reflexive questions in Substack probably. But the first question was about creativity requiring risk and the willingness to trust, and this idea that so many of us find the not knowing really, really uncomfortable. And so do you want to share what you'd kind of been reflecting on with that question?
Okay, let me start with, in a bizarre place that I'm hoping will shock everybody, let's start with McDonald's. Because you did not expect me to start there. Why is McDonald's so successful? It's because you know what you're getting. Wherever you are in the world, the quality might not be as good as a local restaurant run by, a trattoria or something run by a family, but you know what you're getting. Mm-hmm. So our brains are set up to want to know what we're getting. And so McDonald's has thrived. People stay in harmful relationships because they're known harmful. The freedom of kind of coming out of that, the unknown freedom feels much less safe than that kind of known suffering that people are caught in. So I'm trying to start with McDonald's by giving people a hook. We can see that McDonald's is globally successful. And it's not successful and never has suggested that it's the best food in the world. That's not what it's selling, but it's selling predictability. It says if you go in New York or if you go in Kenya, wherever you are, you're going to get the same burger. So it takes out that part of the brain that needs to predict. And so now to a little bit of research, which is by a scientist called Lisa Feldman Barrett. And she's written a brilliant book called How Emotions Are Made. And she believes that 80% of our brain's functioning relies on prediction. 80%. I think that's a phenomenon. When I read that, I was blown away. So I think 80% is a lot. And she bases the whole kind of theory on a sort of body budget. So it costs energy for the brain to experience something new. It costs the body resources in order to accept and be open and accept something brand new. So the brain's job really is to keep the body within a kind of survivable, efficient range of resources so that it's not expending too much. Because let's not forget for a second that the brain is designed to keep us alive. Yeah. It's not designed to make us happy. We are not entitled to be happy. We have no right to be happy. We just have a brain that says, I'm going to keep you alive at all costs. And so that invariably means let's conserve our resources. So what we'll do is we'll go for everything that becomes familiar. So we choose familiarity every single time. We'll choose familiarity unless we've had a childhood where change has been well handled, or maybe we've had trauma, which means that we can't stay the same because we like nervous system dysregulation on a regular basis. So we'll throw the board game in the air. The brain likes to be right much more than anything else. There's an episode of Black Mirror, actually, where I think it's in one of the earlier series where there's a piece of tech in people's glasses or like in the corner of their eye. And you can rewind conversations and you can play the conversations again. And how the episode plays out is that this guy says, no, you said this thing and I can prove you said this thing because I'm right and I've got the truth here. And he replays it and essentially ends up alone. Like, because he's so fixated on being right that he's also alone, which is also, it's another thing Esther Perel talks about with her couples in therapy. She'll often say, you can be right and alone, or you can open your mind and try and take in the other person's experience. And of course, that we're talking about sex here. We're not just talking about one person being right about a burger or one person being right about the best route to get to work. We're talking about one person being able to just not know sexually in a sexual encounter not know what comes next, to be able to enter the space of what is it between us that wants to happen here that is not in my control? What am I sensing in this other body?
Yeah.
Because if we tune into that, and the tantric sex kind of theory definitely gets us to do that, to really try and disengage the brain and let your sensations feel. And when you tune into that, there's no question of what comes next. There's no question of what should I do, because it just becomes, it becomes the most organic sort of unfolding. And then you're having great sex.
Yeah. And I mean, this idea she was talking about, this idea of co-creating the moment between the people there. You know, what I do then informs what my partner does, which informs what I do. And it's kind of like, she was talking about this figure of 8, which I really enjoyed, that sort of, that image. But you mentioned something, well, you mentioned lots of things there. I'm going to be reflecting on this episode a long time, I'm sure, as I'm sure the listeners will. But this idea of attunement, being attuned to yourself, to your body, to the other. And I feel at the moment like we are so disconnected, distracted by everything that's going on around us. We're distracted by our phone, we're distracted by our work, we're distracted by the chaos around us, the commitments that we have. Do you know how couples can start to attune to each other in that moment?
It's interesting you finished that question with something that's going to flip my response a little bit. You said in that moment, and it's not an in that moment task. I think it's a bit of a lifestyle choice. She called Karen Gurney. She writes a lot about sex as well. She's a sex therapist. I think she's a sex therapist. She talks a lot about sex anyway. And she talks about that flirting starts, foreplay starts when the last sexual encounter ends. And so this is not about foreplay being, we're not looking at a menu here and saying, I'd like option number 1, please. And also we should not be seeing this like a dinner. There's a starter, a main course, and then a dessert. That's not how sex is at its best. What we want is a bit more of a buffet where you might start with a prawn vol au vent, and then you might go rogue and have a trifle and then go back to a sausage roll. There is no progression. We should be moving a little bit more fluidly through the menu of what... You're quaking. You're shocked.
I do love a sausage roll.
So many jokes, so little time.
Gosh.
Where were we? I've lost us, Lucy. I've lost us.
Sorry, I apologise. So you were talking about trifle, sausage roll.
I don't think the trifle was the point I was making. You were saying in the moment, that's it.
It's in the moment, attuning.
More than the moment. Yeah. So I think being able to contact your body is something that is it needs to be done beyond the bedroom, so to speak, but also then maybe the bedroom is the hardest place for it to be done. So there's somebody who used to come and see me, and I try and get this person to get in touch with their body a little bit, kind of how are you feeling right now? And they check their watch and go, well, my heart rate's up. What hope do we have of being able to connect to our body if we can't even sense our heart rate, for somebody to be so disconnected from themselves? And it's almost pointless me sitting here and saying, how do we connect to our body? Because if somebody were to type grounding techniques or mind-body awareness into Google, they would come up with a million different meditations or, 10-minute kind of body scans, that kind of thing. A body scan will help. So they're all techniques that will help you get in touch, but it's all nothing if we don't have the mental / emotional capacity to take that risk. You've used the word risk. I've used the word risk.
Yeah.
If somebody's body is filled with shame every time they get naked, or every time they see their partner naked, or every time something is mentioned that relates to this particular sexual act that they're about to do, if a body goes into panic, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what we've done in advance of that. We need to work on that in that moment. And the question is as broad as the individuals who are in front of us, really. But getting in touch with the body, people can Google that. There are a million little techniques that people can get stuck into. But if you have something that's stopping you doing that because you've got shame or you've previously suffered abuse, then you go and get yourself a therapist who can talk you through those things gently. And get you to slowly expand what we call our window of tolerance so that we can start to have a broader experience.
Creativity allows me to attune to myself. So when I'm in the creative process of editing the episodes and I'm in that moment, I'm in that world, and I'm listening for the story, and my creative juices are flowing, I am connected to myself. And I wonder for those people who are also exploring creative practice in whatever way, what they get out of that and that vulnerability, and how they can then take that into their intimate relationships, if that makes sense.
You're saying, how do people who are familiar with the process of being creative, who are familiar with
Yeah.
creativity, how does that sort of transfer onto or into sex?
Yeah. How can they use that knowledge and that understanding and the understanding of the creative process into their intimate relationships, or how they communicate about what they want, what they desire? Um, yeah, that's kind of where I'm thinking at the moment.
Okay, so you're talking a little bit about play, I think. You're talking about that sort of play state of
Yes.
freedom and a sort of meditative, I was going to say narrow focus, but it's kind of almost the opposite, isn't it? It's a sort of like I'm at one with the world, if that doesn't sound too up its
No,
own
that's
arse.
exactly what I mean. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
No pun intended. I love it.
So in which case you're talking there about removing an outcome. And
Yes.
again, this is difficult because of the starter, main course, dessert approach that we have to sex. And so if we want to enter a play state, then we have to make sure the person that we're with also wants to enter that play state. And so we have to have had a conversation about that. So we have to been able to, like I said at the beginning, that radical thing that we have to be able to talk about sex in order to have that conversation with our partners in the first instance. And then we've got to enter that place. And then, if I can draw on another theory now, there is a brilliant book. If anybody is interested in reading any more about this, I say anyone, it's a particularly female-centric book, but it's called Come As You Are, super title, Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski. And she's also done a couple of TED Talks, and she's got a brief podcast as well. And she is brilliant, and she's sparky, and she's relatable. And she has found this bit of research that she's kind of made her own, really, about the accelerators and the brakes. So we've often thought in our society about entering that play state is about porn, or it's about sex toys, or it's about adding, it's about more, it's about doing, it's about seeing, stimulating, buying things, it's more. And that would be the sort of the accelerator kind of domain, really, where how is my sexuality turned on? And how do I turn on my turn-ons? And that's all well and good. But what Emily Nagoski focuses on is actually the more important thing, and this relates to play, is that we have to turn off our brakes. We have to turn off the turn-offs.
Yes.
And so maybe if your feet are cold, nothing's happening. Maybe if you've not cleaned the cat litter tray, nothing's happening. Maybe if your partner goes and picks up the kids from school and then comes home, sorts out a play date so the kids can go somewhere else and says, come on, baby, it's our time. Maybe that's the thing that's going to work because your partner has taken care of the kids. And so it all feels like somebody has taken away the break. Like if your mother-in-law's in the next room, that's a break. What are the things, what are the breaks in your life? And Emily Nagoski, I think she's even got it on her website, actually. It's a list of questions that we can ask ourselves. What is it that gets in the way of sex for you? It's a really important question. I'd kind of like to put a bit of a pause around it, but I guess people can press pause on their players, can't they?
Yeah.
What is it that gets in the way of good sex? Is it if I'm cold? Is it if I've got bad breath? Can't have sex first thing in the morning unless I've been to the toilet and clean my teeth. What else? Like I say, does it have to be that the house is tidy, the washing up's done? I can't bear it if the dog's not had a wee. Do you know?
Yeah.
All of those things. So
things.
we might, as a culture, again, I keep coming back to this, don't I? We've got this real sort of focus on the turning on the ons, which are the accelerators, the things that stimulate.
Yes.
Which is just so typical of our society. But actually, we would be much better focused if we worked really hard on removing all the things that are in the way. So we're trying to remove the barriers, and that then enables us. And I think this is where creativity comes in. So you tell me, you're the creativity expert. When we remove the brakes and we enter a play state, I imagine creativity is not going to happen if certainly for me, I can't be creative in a non-sexual way. I can't be creative if I've got other things in the way. For me, really, really, I'm serious. If there is washing up to be done, you're lost. I can't be creative. I can't be creative in the bedroom. Like, fuck it. No, I'm out. I've got to go and wash up, get my marigolds on, deal with that. And then I've got headspace. And so for people, for you, for your listeners as well, what stops, what gets in the way, what interferes with play? Does that trigger anything?
Well, I'm going to say something now.
Oh, this sounds good.
I try and embrace the chaos. I am going to have to force myself and work through those interruptions in order to be creative. And sometimes that is when I am the most creative. If I know I have got 5 minutes to bash out a Canva, if I'm in the right moment, it works and it comes together perfectly. And then that goes out on Instagram and I don't think about it anymore. Sometimes I have to be in that state of, I've got no time, I've got to do it now. And sometimes that is when the best work comes. If I've got hours and hours and hours, I've got 3 hours to do something, it's often just not good enough. It's not
So
right. It's
all
the
you're saying is
expectations.
that break, the thing that might be a break for some people, is actually an accelerator for you. So not having time, because that's not for me. We're clearly coming at this from opposite places. For me, brevity of time, having no time is a break. For you, you're saying it's an accelerator, which is why these questions are really hard to answer, because it is exactly perfectly illustrated. It's unique to every single person. Each individual person has to think about what it is that stops play. And you've kind of brought up an interesting sort of subsection, a subject here, which is that play requires boundaries. It's easier to play if we have boundaries around us, if we have frameworks. I mean, you're a mother. If you put, it's a son you have, isn't it, a boy? If you put him in the middle of an empty field and said, right, go play, that might take him a bit longer, perhaps, I don't know, depends on how many times you do that with him, than if you gave him a few things and gave him a little structure, just a little framework, and then you can play within that. Then that becomes more expansive. It becomes more of an opportunity for play. I don't know. Again, does that? I'm not a parent, so I don't know.
It's almost like in order to play the game, sometimes you need rules, sometimes you need those boundaries. So then there is safety within that. I get it. And I think something else that's coming up for me is this idea of accepting that time is different for everybody and this idea of patience. And sometimes when I have got 5 minutes to do something to do with a podcast, for example, and it's not happening, I need to know, okay, that hasn't been the moment, and not to berate myself because I've not managed to do it in that 5 minutes, but to actually be patient with myself in the process and realize that I need to come back to it at another time when the washing up has been done, or when I don't have a year 4 show to direct and I'm thinking about costumes, or is something that you said about headspace. I think the idea of, tuning in to where you are in the day or the week or the month and realize that actually you might just need to give something a bit more time.
You're talking almost like the same idea that Elizabeth Gilbert talks about in Big Magic. I don't know whether you've read that. Have you read Big Magic?
I've read bits of it. So I know listeners will be like, oh my gosh, she's not read Big Magic.
Oh, I think it's beautiful. I'm a bit of a Gilbert fan.
Me too. I am, absolutely. It's on my bookshelf, and maybe I need to go to it. I'm currently working my way through The Atlas of the Heart by Brené Brown. I've gone back to that book. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
In Big Magic, Liz Gilbert talks about the idea that inspiration, an idea or creativity kind of almost sort of lands in us, and that the universe brings it to a certain degree of ripeness or maturity, and then it lands in us. And then it's our task to sit with it long enough so that, like you say, sometimes our brain just needs to play with it. Our subconscious just needs to play with it a little bit longer. And then it's ripe fruit to be picked. But if we're trying to force something, because that's what you're saying, if I sit down and I try and force something, then it's not going to work. And I'm now wondering if we can transpose this right into the sex world as well. Like if we're trying to force something, then what are we forcing here? And again, if we're forcing something, then we're looking at outcome, aren't we? We're not looking at what wants to happen here. We're looking at, what can I achieve? Which is in some way, I don't know, are we, trying to prop up our egos or trying to prop up our idea of what our relationship should be or what single life should be? What narrative are we trying to prop up if we're forcing something before it's ready?
Yeah. And for those of you who, do have children and a lot of the time is spent caregiving, the last thing that we might want to do is to be intimate because we're touched out, we're tapped out. To kind of, it's almost like you shed a skin. Like I'm shedding the skin of being a parent, and we've only got this short period of time to be intimate, and we've got to do it now, otherwise it's going to be another 6 months. So you do end up having to think, you're planning it in, this idea, this romanticized idea of, sex is spontaneous and, it happens when you've been out for drinks and you've been with friends and you've all dolled up. I mean, really? Yeah, sometimes you do have to put it in the calendar.
You're talking again Emily Nagoski language. She talks about responsive desire and spontaneous desire, and that almost always when we see sex in the media, it's spontaneous desire. You have two people colliding in a way that would break dentures. They collide in a really powerful and passionate way, and they're ripping each other's clothes off. And that spontaneous desire is what we think should happen, what sex should be. But actually, it is not necessarily a mature approach to sex. And there's a bloke called David Schnarch who says quite crudely, you might as well go and relieve yourself on a lamppost. If that's the kind of sex you're having, it's about a functional sexual release. And actually how much of that is about an evolving and emerging pleasure between you and another person. So, or people, if you're that way inclined. So maybe the idea is, yes, schedule it in the calendar. You put yourself in bed. Let's say that. Let's just pluck a location out of thin air. So you put yourself in bed naked with the person that you want to have sex with, maybe, or you would quite like to have sex with sometimes. You might not want to have sex with them in that moment, but all you've got to be is willing. And then in that space, in fact, this answers a question you asked earlier. You just focus on what feels nice. So you're not going anywhere. We're not saying, I can't wait because I'm going to have my orgasm in 3 minutes, 20 minutes, 4 hours, whatever. No. I'm just going to do this thing that feels nice. And I'm going to go with maybe asking my partner if that feels nice, the thing that I'm doing for them. And we're going to just slowly just see how this feels. We're going to approach the buffet and see what appeals to us. We don't necessarily make our decision about what we're going to get from this encounter. And so, yes, by scheduling that perhaps isn't as helpful as scheduling naked time in bed. Or if you don't like to be naked and you want to wear something kinky, whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
It's so hard to be inclusive when we're talking about these things because, whatever works for you. But if you've got sex on the agenda, then is that really playful? Again, you've got an outcome in mind there.
And I suppose the same with, so that kind of fits in with creativity. If you're looking at your week and going, right, I have, a couple of hours on a Tuesday, I have the end of the day on Thursday, I'm going to schedule in that time for creativity. The pressure to do something creative. I mean, you want to do something completely different, or you end up forcing yourself down a road that you don't want to go down. So yeah, I can definitely see those.
And so what is it, the artist's way? What she suggests is just little and often, which is what Karen Gurney, when I was talking about her earlier, when she said foreplay starts after the last sexual encounter, because what she's saying is that there's a sexual currency that exists between two people who live in a relationship. Obviously, if you're on one night stands, it's a different kettle of fish, but in relationships, we have a sexual currency. And it's about keeping that alive. And so that can be, a dirty text message or a photograph or a note around the house or, whatever it might be that you can do that keeps that sexual frisson alive. In the same way that creativity, if you've got all the pressure on a Friday afternoon to do a thing, that's totally different than sort of maintaining some connection with that world inside you that you can tap into. That's different, I think.
I love that. This idea of the world and, something that you draws back to the place that you go. Actually, you're topping it up incrementally. You're topping that up. And then when you do have that moment of inspiration, that big orgasmic moment, you're like, oh, this is what we were working towards all along and we didn't know it.
I think you've still got an outcome in mind there.
Because you're working towards something. So it's like, why do we have sex? Why do we create?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what are we doing this for? And apparently there's 300 and odd answers to that question. Why do we have sex? And it's rarely, actually, as in good sex, is rarely for sexual release. If you want sexual release, go and have a wank. But if you want actual, like, mature sex that engages and connects you to another human being, whether it's a one-night stand or a long-term relationship, then this is not about just getting your rocks off, so to speak. It's about so much more than that, and that requires the vulnerability. That requires, a phenomenal amount of work.
Do you think you might go back to This Won't Fix You, or do you think you're going to leave that now?
Much more focused on romantic obsession and limerence. That's where a lot of my work is at the moment. And it was too narrow a focus for the podcast for me to be. I haven't thought of a way to do it.
Yeah.
So what I thought I would do is go on other people's podcasts and talk about limerence, which is what I've been
I don't know
doing.
what limerence is, I'm sorry.
It's obsessive feelings for another human being, like absolutely destructive feelings, utterly obsessive. It's actually what most of our rom-coms are about, and it's what most of our romantic poetry is written about, but it's not love. It's a kind of an obsessive state where people are not really functioning in their lives at all. It's like an addiction of sorts.
Wow.
And
So you're
that's my area of
focusing,
specialism.
so you're going to so you are specialising that in that already.
Yeah, yeah. So I did an interview yesterday for the Counselling Tutor podcast, and I've also done another interview with a woman called Anne Jalen Burns, who runs a podcast called Do I Really Hate Men, about divorce, and again helping people kind of get out of relationships that are stuck, where you can't get over your ex kind of thing. It's a similar sort of process at play. That you think that person's the only one who can answer all your problems. That's my area of specialism. So no, I'm not unlikely to go back to my own podcast. Something new might come of it, later on. I've
Yeah.
archived it, so it's still available. People can still download it, and they still are. People are still downloading it, so it's being
Yeah, I bet.
found.
Yeah. Oh, it's such a good podcast, and I loved the format. So obviously I will put this in the show notes, but This Won't Fix You is available to download still. And the format was you discussed metaphors with guests, concepts, and then in the second part was much more of an intimate conversation with you and the listener, and sort of unpacked that from a therapeutic point of view. And it was amazing, actually. Is there a lasting is there a message that we would like to leave people with in today's episode, do you think?
Yes, definitely. And I think we're going to come back to that outcome, the outcome. And again, I don't know what kind of creatives listen to your podcast, but I wonder how many of them sit down and say, I want to get this out of this creative period. I wonder how many, have that kind of and if they can sort of picture what it is that they're trying to get. I don't know. So in terms of sex, I think I'd like to say, if you're asking yourself during the sexual encounter, if you're asking yourself, am I doing this right? Am I taking too long? What's the other person thinking or feeling? Are they enjoying it? What should I do next? If you're asking yourself any of those questions, then in fact, if you're asking yourself any questions at all, then your brain is engaged. And what we need to do is get people out of their heads. And that requires, there's so many blocks in the way of that. And this is why my podcast was called This Won't Fix You, because you can tell people until you're blue in the face that they need to do something different. We all know we should eat more vegetables, smoke and drink less, and do more exercise. But how many of us do it? And so what's in the way of us making those changes? It can often need therapy for, or a lot of time and patience with a good friend or a partner. So for me, I think if I'm going to leave people with anything, it is, if you're going into your sexual encounter believing that this should happen, then this should happen, then this should happen, and I should feel this and they should feel that, then you're not having the best sex that you can, at least as a couple. So how can you let go of that head and really tune into the body and see what the body is asking of you, and what the body with you that's alongside you, what that body is asking for? And I do think that this is what we're talking about here. Is, you've used the word intimacy. It is intense intimacy. And so I appreciate it's a lot. And if somebody's afraid of connection because they've been afraid of getting involved for all sorts of traumatic reasons, some big, some small traumas, but real connection with another person is incredibly challenging. The number of people who sit in my room, they've willingly come for therapy. So they are already in a small minority of people who want to relate better to the other people in their lives, and they still struggle to look me in the eye. They still struggle to be with me and really present. And so what we're saying here about turning off all those things in your head, this is not as simple as saying eat more vegetables, because people can't do it. So look after yourself. If you can't turn those voices off, then there's a narrative sitting behind them. There's something that you believe about yourself that is being propped up by this sexual encounter, your sexual prowess. So, and it is the male demographic is painfully tied to sexual power, sexual proficiency that the heterosexual man has to perform. There's so much. It's such an easy demographic to talk about here, because the straight man has that just woven into every single cultural message that he's ever received. And so for me to say, stop asking yourself, are they enjoying it? It's just pointless. And yet, if you cannot answer that question, or you can't turn that part off, then there is some narrative about yourself that you're struggling to let go of. Does that, I mean, that sounds a bit deep, doesn't it? When we've
It
been talking
does.
about trifle and sausage rolls.
No, but it does. And we briefly mentioned the word shame, but it is there, isn't it? It is literally the pink elephant in the room. Are we going to talk about shame a little bit, do you think? Shall
Okay.
we be brave? Shall we
Let's
be
talk about
brave
shame.
and talk about shame for a little bit? We've got all the time in the world, but
I spend my days talking about shame. So crack on, ask me a question.
I don't.
No, most people go, shame, and run to the hills with their hands in the air.
I don't talk about shame, but it's there, and it'll be there for all of our listeners, surely.
So nobody escapes.
Nobody escapes shame, right? Obviously, it shows up in different ways for everybody, but I wouldn't even know how to start talking about shame. Help me, Nadine.
Okay.
Help me.
Shame collapses the body's capacity to play. And there's a really lovely bit of research, not to do with sex at all, if I may, but there was, what they did was they put, it's always they, isn't it? They put a little boy. He was, I think, probably pre-verbal or just on the cusp of being able to speak. So he was a little boy, very little boy, at a high chair, and gave him a toy to play with. I can't remember what it was. It was like blocks or bricks, that kind of, really simplistic kind of creativity. So the kid could build things with these bricks. Kids playing, happy, 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 all fine. Then they had somebody come in, shout at the mother who was in the room with the baby. Somebody come in, create tension basically.
Yes.
And a little bit of fear, and then walk out. They didn't interact with the child at all. They didn't present the child with anything directly frightening, but it was a frightening thing to be in the environs of. Yeah. And then when the person had left, the child wouldn't play. And no matter how much time passed, when that child was presented with that particular toy, the child would not play with that toy. So that toy became laden with the association of this, in inverted commas, traumatic moment. Does that make sense? Your face is saying it makes sense.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, it's profound,
Well,
isn't it?
it's taken me back. That's why I'm
It's
just
profound.
Like, wow.
And you think about that's a controlled situation, and you think about how many of those kinds of traumas our children are exposed to on a daily basis, especially when they get to school. Do you know, the whole thing is a scary sort of expansive unpredictability, isn't it? And so shame is at play in all those scenarios when we feel that kind of fear. When we're frightened, we can't play. When we're frightened, we can't play. It's a massive thing that we have to overcome in order to make contact with that part of ourselves. And so we can, I could draw, these are the lowest hanging fruit I have in front of me. I could draw on probably 150 stories in 3 seconds in my brain of the number of ways that somebody has been shamed about their body, about their sexuality, about their sexual expression, their gender expression, anything that's related to their sexuality. So even something as simple as, I say as simple, I still find it quite horrific, but a mother saying to her 13-year-old daughter, "Oh, we've got to sort out your monobrow." You might think that is an innocuous thing, but of course the mother who has the capacity to say that to her child is probably saying lots of other things too and giving lots of other messages. And so we can talk about these really simple, and they're harder to spot, aren't they? It's very easy to point to these massive traumas of, abuse or outright sexual assault.
Yes.
But the more insidious ones are those that we can't necessarily tease out. So, shame is at play in all of those. And I think maybe here we cannot not say, can we, that women and their bodies are shamed on a regular basis. We're shamed for wanting sex or for not wanting sex. We're shamed for wanting children, not wanting children. All of our choices are shamed. And so it's an integral part of sexual expression for many people. Everybody, I think.
Everybody. And it's quite frightening to think that, I suppose there wouldn't be any way of knowing what sort of attachment that child had with the mother. I suppose it wouldn't matter if that child had a secure attachment to the mother.
I can't remember whether there was a mother in the room or whether they just brought this adult. I can't remember those specifics.
That's kind of where my head is going, is like, because attachment is it's fundamental, isn't it? The sort of attachment styles that we have with our mums, with our family members, and how that can sort of play out in the rest of our relationships that we build from there. But that's kind of where my head went.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that those early relationships are blueprints for how we form future relationships, certainly. And what stress in that can cause. Like I say, I can't remember whether the mother was in the room. I can't quite remember. And I don't even know what the experiment's called. So, I mean, you could AI it, couldn't you, and describe it and it would find it. But certainly attachment, gosh, There's a woman called the Crappy Childhood Fairy who does a podcast. I don't know whether you've heard of her. Such a great name, the Crappy Childhood Fairy. She's not a therapist, but she talks brilliantly a lot about sexual addiction and romantic obsession, limerence. And she talks about certain attachment processes are basically they're eroticized abandonment. And so we can become so frightened of losing another person that we will keep sacrificing ourselves and just keep rejecting ourselves and rejecting and squashing ourselves in order to preserve the relationship. And again, while we're doing that, we're not engaging in good sex, because good sex requires that we hold ourself and our relationship, or I don't mean it has to be the person we are relating to.
Yes.
Yeah, that we have to have that tension, that it's like a dynamic relationship, that we need to have both. So we can't abandon self and we can't abandon the relationship, because that then becomes essentially a sexual assault. Nobody wants to be having sex with somebody who is in no way tuned into the relational dynamic, because that's abuse. We all want to be considered in this relational dynamic. Otherwise, we're essentially with Andrew Tate, aren't we? So what we want is we want to be ourself, and we want to fuel and feed the relationship too. And that tension, I think, is eternal. And we play with that in every single relationship of our lives. How can I hold myself and this relationship at the same time?